Good late evening, everybody, and Monday. Today is March the 14th. Some people call it Pi Day, 3.14.
Yep, my teacher, Jake's old teacher, he kept on saying Happy Pi Day to all, and we're like, what the heck?
Oh,
And then
three,
he came in our classroom and said it.
because today is March 14th, but
Yeah.
doesn't have the rest of the numbers in it, 3.141592654, and it keeps on continuing. But it's neither here nor there. It's not important. We are grateful if you're following us on Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, or Facebook. You're able to do that because of Restream.io. Okay, Richard and Paul. Okay. We're experimenting with a new camera that we have here in the living room. It's sitting straight across from me, and I think it's a little bit clearer. Before, we were using a camera off the laptop, which the laptop is sitting really far away from the rest of us. So with this camera, we're able to put it in a lot closer. And we're going to go ahead and get started. This is Scriptural Salvation Baptist Tabernacle. Welcome to my living room. My name is Andy. To my left, I have Richard and Paul, Steve. Like I said, I'm Andy. To my right, I have Grace. In the corner, you have Hannah. She's actually almost in view. And then off camera, you have my wife, Elizabeth, and our dog, Sweetheart. Continuing prayers for Liz. The pregnancy is still a closely monitored one. It's not listed in the high risk realm, but they're having her go twice a week for appointments, and it's still a lot for the whole family to endure. And we're gonna with that coming up soon this week is St. Patty's Day on the 17th. So because of that, we'll be having an all Robin Mark music for the service. Robin Mark being the Northern Irish Christian singer that does the Irish songs that I really enjoy. So, glory to the Lord.
Steve, want to sing the song?
Alright, let's do that first. Oh, it's down here. Okay. And then I'll go here.
Lift up your heads, O ye gates, let the King of glory come in. Be lifted up, O ancient doors, let the King of glory come in. Lift up your heads, O ye gates, let the King of glory come in. Be lifted up, O ancient doors, let the King of glory come in. The altars we've built and the works we have done never compare to the Savior's love. The hearts of the humble are temples of praise as we worship the Ancient of Days. As we worship the Ancient of Days. Glory to the Lord our God. Glory to the Lamb of the throne. Golden light is on our hearts with our lips. We'll rise up and praise as we worship the Ancient of Days. he gets, let the King of glory come in. Be lifted up, O ancient doors, let the King of glory come in. We can ascend to the hill of the Lord, people of clean hearts and hands. You who are righteous and seeking His face, come and worship the Ancient of Days. Come and worship the Ancient of Days. Glory to the Lord. Glory to the Lord our God. Glory to the Lamb on the throne. Open wide the gates of our hearts, with our lips we rise up and praise. As we worship the Ancient of Days. Glory to the Lord our God. Glory to the Lamb on the throne. Open wide the gates of our hearts, with our lips we rise up and praise. As we worship the Ancient of Days. Lift up your heads, O ye gates, and the King of glory come in. Be lifted up, O ancient doors, and the King of glory come in. Lift up your heads, O ye gates, and the King of glory come in. Be lifted up, O ancient doors, and the King of glory come in.
Alright, just another whole minute of them playing chords. Okay, we're continuing on with our study in the book of Genesis, and we are up to chapter 22 of Genesis, and been following the study and life of Abraham and how long he's had to wait to have his son Isaac and the misadventures he's had along the way. And this chapter is no different. So, continuing on in the book of Genesis. That is a ram, but we'll see why later. There's a picture of the ram here now. This is our 17th lesson of the 22nd chapter of Genesis. And we'll be reading through Psalm 24. Okay,
Yeah.
no, just sit still. You got it?
The earth is the Lord, the
Fullness
fullness
thereof.
thereof, the world and those who
Well,
dwell therein.
Yep.
For he has founded it upon the sea and
established it.
established it upon the rivers.
Very good.
Who shall ascend the hill of the Lord, and who shall stand in his holy place?
Pause. Does that sound familiar? That was in the song we just sang. That was one of the verses. Okay, continue.
He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who does not lift up his soul to what is false, and does not swear deceitfully.
Deceitfully.
Not
What?
darn it.
Okay. He will receive blessing from the Lord and righteousness from the God of his salvation. Such is the generation of those who seek him, who seek the face of the God of Jacob.
Jacob, lift up your hands,
Heads,
son, heads, oh goddess,
gates.
gates. Oh my gosh. And be lifted up, oh ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Who is the King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle.
Hannah,
Lift up your heads, O gates, and lift them up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord of hosts. He is the King of glory. I had basically the same on his face.
yes.
But different words.
Only a slight.
How should it be the same if it's falling down?
All right. Like I said, by this point, Isaac had been born. Ishmael and his mother Hagar had been cast out, and we're going to pick up there with chapter 22, verses 1 through 4.
Thank you, Daddy.
Yes, I believe.
Thank you.
Oh, I think he's excited about continuing on the story. Someone's already have it down there. Verses 1 through 4 of chapter 22.
And now it's time for our narrative.
Genesis 22. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And he said, Here am I. He said, Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering, and arose, and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes, and saw the place from afar.
Oh, Paul. Okay. The chapter starts off with after these things. And so we're not quite sure the timeline. We don't know how old Isaac is at this point. We know that in the last chapter he had been weaned, so he was somewhere between 3 and 5 years old. But now we're not sure how old he is. There's some clues later on that kind of point it out. Ishmael has been cast out, but only the son of promise is left. Now, what's interesting is if you talk to any Muslim and you talk about the story of a son that the father takes him and is going to sacrifice him, and God intervenes, any Muslim will tell you, well, that was Ishmael that Abraham took and was going to sacrifice. But it wasn't.
It was false.
Yes, but they tell it as Ishmael because they're descended from Ishmael. So they want the person that they're descended of to be the person that gets the best part of the story. In Abraham's life so far, we've had lies in Egypt, where he told the Pharaoh that his wife was his sister. We've had Sarah deciding that she was going to take everything into her hands, and had Abraham get the maidservant pregnant, Hagar. We had the part where Abraham and Sarah both laughed when they were told that their son Isaac was going to be born, and Abraham's 100 years old. Abraham goes in, he intercedes for Sodom. He tries to talk God out of destroying it. He's like, well, if we can find 10 good people there, will you save it? And the Lord says yes, but there weren't 10 to be found. Sodom's destroyed. Abraham goes into the Philistine territory and lies to Abimelech and does the same nonsense lie that he had done in the past, where he said that Sarah was his sister, so that she could be protected. Hagar and Ishmael are booted out, and then the last chapter we talked about Abraham making a covenant with a ruler, and they settled a dispute they had at the well of Beersheba. And I starred Beersheba, gave it the old asterisks, because Beersheba was a shining point in Abraham's story so far. He was able to be what God wanted him to be. All these other instances in his life, he had good moments, but he wasn't the superstar that God wanted him to be. Here at Beersheba, he settled the problem that they have the way that a man of God is supposed to, and he did it without lying, and he did it by completely telling the truth with the Abimelech that was there. There's been 25 years that Abraham has had to wait for Isaac to be born. It's been a slow build, but God's been giving him these tests, and Abraham has not been perfect. Time passes again after these things, and Abraham is called by God again. Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love. Well, let's compare that to Jesus. In Matthew 3:17, Jesus is being baptized in the River Jordan by John the Baptist, and you hear the voice of God the Father come down, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." And I'm not sure why I wrote last week there. Well, guess it doesn't matter. Moving on.
It probably meant to get rid of it, but you forgot.
No, I wouldn't type something in there if I meant to get rid of it. I was supposed to. I'm getting a spam call. Well, you can spam yourself. Oh, yes. Last week, because I compared the birth of Isaac with the birth of Jesus.
That's right.
And this is just another comparison of Isaac to Jesus. When God addressed Isaac to Abraham, he called him the son, your only son whom you loved. And the same thing when God is talking to Jesus. This is my beloved son with whom I am well pleased. Now, the next thing that God says to Abraham, each piece is short and cut it. Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love. Go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering. They're short little phrases, and to me, it represents something that's cutting and to the point. It's painful to think of, take your son, your only son, whom you love, and go kill him and offer him as a burnt offering. But this is exactly what God Almighty is asking Abraham to do to Isaac. The Canaanites, who were in the land at the time, offered human sacrifice. Offering human sacrifice was nothing to them or other primitive cultures around the world. Think of the Aztecs, and they did that in the pre-Celtic religions in Britain. There were human sacrifices. So to them, taking their son and knifing him and as a tribute to the gods would have been nothing. They wouldn't have cared. It wouldn't have bothered them one bit. Abraham was hoping that his God was different, but he lived among these people that their gods demanded them to give human sacrifices. Now, when it says that he wanted him to offer him as a burnt offering isn't when you take the animal or the human and you burn it alive. It's what you do is you kill them to sacrifice them, and then you burn afterwards down to ashes. And that's what a burnt offering is. So you're not throwing them on the wood stove and burning them. You're killing them first, then burning the body, like cremation. Next morning, there's a travel day. Does Abraham have a lot of questions? I know I would. God just says to him, take your son, go to somewhere I'm going to tell you to go to, and offer him there as a burnt offering. And Abraham packs up and starts to go. Now, there's a lot of criticism in the Bible, and there are a lot of people that say, your God is cruel. He was going to kill Isaac. And at this point in the narrative, they have a right to be critical of what's happening. But that criticism starts here and ends here, though, because you have to read the whole context. This is Abraham this is God molding Abraham to be a man of God. That's the whole context. And you have to read the rest of the chapter. The story doesn't end here. God doesn't say, take your son Isaac, offer him as a burnt offering, and then Abraham takes him and does it immediately. You have to trust the promiser, not the promise. And this has actually been a problem for Abraham so far. Abraham was promised that he was going to have a son, and Sarah thought that she would just fulfill that promise and let him have the maidservant have a kid for her. And that wasn't in God's plan. Now in Hebrews chapter 11, we're told that he considered that God was even able to raise him from the dead. So we're told that running through Abraham's mind is he even thought that God was able to raise people from the dead. So if he went ahead and did the sacrifice for God, maybe he would get his son back. So that's a neat insight into what was going through Abraham's mind. All right, and listen to verses 5 through 8 of chapter 22. 5 through 8 of chapter 22.
But you forgot to share it.
Then Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So they went both of them together. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, my father? And he said, here I am, my son. He said, behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. So they went both of them together.
Paul, you didn't tell me to put the
Yeah,
verse
you did.
up there. No, I didn't put the verse up there so that people, well, you heard it. All right. Oh, okay. That's okay. Now, God tells Abraham to take his son to sacrifice him, but he does it in a 3-day journey. Isaac isn't marched to the pyre immediately to be set ablaze and killed. It's a slow trip to his death. He's being slow roasted. Now, the 3-day journey that they go through is they were living in Beersheba, which is down here, if you can see my mouse. Go to the very end of the Dead Sea and go to the west, Beersheba. And they walked all the way up to the hills surrounding Jerusalem, which is up here in the middle of Israel. And then Moriah would have been in here in these hills. So from Beersheba to Jerusalem, a 3-day journey. Let's see. But what also that does is Abraham has this command that God gave to him burning on his brain for 3 full days. Well, I have to march up here to Jerusalem, and I have to sacrifice my son, and then I have to cremate him, and I got to think about it the whole way. So it isn't an immediate thing when you get it done. Oh, be careful. Ooh, Steve's coffee.
Oh, he's sticking.
Yeah. Yet, God is in control. God knew that giving Abraham this time to think about it was part of his plan. So he gave them the place that was a 3 days journey away from where they were. So even when you think all is lost and the Bible critics have you with your God is cool, he was going to kill Isaac, God is in control. Abraham says, we'll go over there and worship. He's talking about Abraham and his son. So they go away from the main group and they go off, and there are 2 of them there, but yet there are 3. Abraham in worship, when there are 2 gathered to meet in God's name, God is always there with him. And Abraham knew that at this time he needed God, because this was a very tough thing to do. And in Matthew, we're told, for where 2 are gathered in my name, it says where 2 or 3 or more are gathered in my name, there I am among them. So God tells us that it's not necessary for God to be in our presence to go to one of those gigantic mega churches with thousands of people. 2 meeting in his name and worshiping and loving him will have Jesus there with them. And this applies today. Small groups, when we meet, we still have God with us. And we need him most during trials and tough times in our life. And Abraham was definitely in a trial and a tough time. Now, Isaac makes the observation, I see the fire, and I see the wood, and I see the knife, but where's the lamb? Is this a trap? Like you brought me out here in the woods, and I see this, and I see this, and I see this, but I don't see the animal you're going to sacrifice. Why am I out here? And Abraham says, God will provide for himself the lamb. Maybe Abraham believed this wholeheartedly. Maybe Abraham believed that God was going to be there at the last minute and provide the sacrificial animal, but maybe Abraham was just kind of going along because he knew that God was in control. So we're unknown if this is full faith or if it's foreshadowing. Foreshadowing being God will come in at the last minute and provide a sacrifice in place of Isaac.
By the wind.
Okay, Paul, you have to get your face out of the camera and sit back.
Blown by the wind.
Move back. Okay. All right, we're on to chapter 22, verses 9 through 14. I have to 9 through 14. Stop this. I have to share the screen. There.
When they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there, and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand, and took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. He said, Do not lay your hand on the boy, or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram, caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram, and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of that place, "The Lord will provide." As it is said to this day, "On the mount of the Lord it shall be provided."
Now, why did he say that he feared him when he was going to sacrifice his son?
Because he was told to do it.
Okay.
If he didn't do it, he didn't hear what God would do to him. When you have the fear of God, you're afraid of his consequences for you more than you are of what could happen to you. Take a Lot, where he lived in Sodom, and he lived like a man. He didn't care about what God's promise was. He cared about what people thought of him. Lot didn't have the fear of God, whereas Abraham just proved he did. So it took me a long time to understand that. Abraham builds the altar, he lays out the wood, he binds his son. But a lot of people will give this picture of there's this little boy, he's like 4 or 5 years old, and Abraham ties him up, and he's got these cute little eyes, and he's looking up at his father with a knife coming down. But
Great picture, a great image.
and there are a lot of people that paint this as what's going on here, but in just the last section, verses 5 through 8, it says that Abraham put the wood on Isaac and had him carry it. So Isaac couldn't have been that young. He was carrying the wood.
He's probably like 7,
I was thinking more like
8.
11 or 12. All right. Isaac was not this little cute 4-year-old with big blue eyes who was staring up at his father saying, "Please don't hack me with a knife." He's actually thinking of him more almost like a teenager, that his father had tied him up and laid him down because that's what God had told him to do. But what this does is it parallels Jesus carrying the cross for his sacrifice. When Jesus went to the cross to die for us, for our sin, Jesus carried his cross that they nailed him to be our sacrifice. Now, Isaac is carrying this wood that he's going to be roasted on, first slaughtered on. So he's carrying this, and he was carrying the wood for his own sacrifice, just like Jesus did. Both Jesus and Isaac are obedient to their fathers. Isaac had to have been obedient to his father. His father was 100 years old at this point. He was an old man. And he tells him, "Well, son, lay down. I'm going to tie you up, and I'm going to sacrifice you here, because that's what God told us to do." Now, Isaac, at that age, I'm picturing most kids would have ran. "No, you're not going to hack me to death with a knife. No, father."
Now they're like, "Oh, no, I'm out of here."
Right? So Isaac was obedient. The point is that Abraham, they always portray Isaac as this tiny little toddler, 4-year-old that Abraham easily could have tied up and put down. But no, that's not the case. Because as we saw, like I said, he's carrying the wood for his own sacrifice. He could have put up a struggle. He could have just broken the old man's hip and ran away. Because Abraham was 100 years old, but he doesn't. He doesn't. He's obedient to his father. Jesus carried the cross to his sacrifice and was obedient to his father, God the Father. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. Now, like I said, I've described to you this famous Bible scene where Abraham has the knife over his head and he's looking down at the 4-year-old little boy. No, he's older. And he's ready to slaughter him. And the knife, and this is in paintings, many famous paintings. And there's Abraham, and he's got the knife up in the air, and he's got the little kid, and he's getting ready to knife him. And the angel of the Lord, who we have said a few times already, is Jesus. Abraham! Abraham! And he gets his attention and he stops him. Whoa, 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 what are you doing? Before Abraham's able to slice him open and get the knife down, God intervenes and stops. Now, this next piece is very similar to something we heard earlier. Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And that's very similar to earlier, where it was the little pieces that were meant to sound like cutting commands. And that's done on purpose. Yep. Reminds me of the short cutting command earlier. Abraham turns around and sees a ram with his horns tangled. Was this miraculous ram always part of the plan? Well, of course it was. God's in control. But, just last chapter, Hagar looks and sees a well that was there, that was a source of water as she and Ishmael were going through the desert, and they both lived because of this well. Their eyes weren't opened until the right time. It's the same thing with Abraham here. He's listening to God's commands. He's getting ready to hack Isaac, but this ram is there and enters in. Now, carried our own execution weapon, commanded to die, obeyed and almost executed. This could be describing three different people. Now, Isaac carried the wood that he was going to be sacrificed on. The knife was with his father. He was commanded to die. Now, obviously, as we saw, he was an older boy, so he went along with what his father did when he tied him up. Isaac obeyed, and he was almost executed. Jesus was told by his father that he had to die for humanity to save us from our sins. He carried his execution weapon. He was carrying the cross. He obeyed what his father told him to do, but Jesus was executed. But this also mirrors all of us, because with us, our sin is our cross that we carry. That will be the death of us if we don't have Jesus in our life. We follow Isaac and live because of...
Blind.
No, not... Yes,
Because of blank.
Yeah, I know it says blank, but you're supposed to
Fill it in.
fill it in.
Blank. I know what it is. Blank. Oh my goodness.
If you said Jesus, which nobody in this room did, they
We
said
were both laughing.
they in this room they said blank.
Now,
Now the ram is substitutionary for Isaac. Jesus is substitutionary for us. We deserve death because of our sin, and the cross that we carry, that is going to be the death of us, is our sin. But Jesus stepped up and was sacrificed on his cross in a substitute for us. Now, at the last second before Isaac was knifed and killed, there was that ram that was killed for him. Now, just so there's another parallel between Isaac and Jesus. Isaac had a substitutionary sacrifice of the lamb that was sacrificed for him. We have Jesus that was sacrificed for us and for our sin. Now, there are times in the Bible when you're reading along that you will see the word Lord, and it will be in all caps, and it will be smaller than the words around it. And when you see Lord written like this, the word that is actually there in Hebrew is this word Yahweh,
Yahweh.
which it means I am. It's how God refers to himself. What?
Sounds like one of the words that I'm doing for one of my songs in chorus.
Well, now Yahweh, I am. When we learn here another name for God, it says God will provide. That in Hebrew, ball, sit still. Just stay right there. The ball went over there, just leave it. All right. The Lord will provide is Yahweh Yireh. Yahweh Yireh. If you've ever heard the term Jehovah Jireh, Yahweh Yireh, what?
I'm learning some
Swahili, yeah. That's not even close to this. This is there used to be a song that was Jehovah Jireh, my provider, his grace is sufficient for me, for me, for me. Jehovah Jireh. And what that word is, where you get the word Jehovah, is when you take the word Yahweh, this YHWH, and Adonai, which is the word that would mean Lord, Lord something or other as a title.
I thought Yahweh had an E.
Well, okay. So in Hebrew, there are no vowels. So the word Yahweh would be written like this YHWH. And how they get the word Jehovah is they take the word Adonai and they mix Adonai and Yahweh together, and it turns out to be Jehovah. But that's not what's written there. It's actually said Yahweh. So now we've heard of the Lord referred to as Yahweh Yireh, Elohim, El Elyon, Elohim being God of gods, or most full, El Elyon, God most high, El Roy, the God who sees me, El Shaddai, God Almighty, El Elom, God everlasting, or everlasting God. Moses is the one that is writing Genesis, and he knew God as Yahweh. So he's writing this. What? Is it God calling you?
That's that.
If it's not important.
What about Jesus?
No, I highly doubt it's that either. All right.
Glass brigade.
Yeah. All right. Verses 15 through 19 of chapter 22.
Wait.
15 through 19 of chapter 22. Nope. There. Now better.
And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son. I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies. And in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba. And Abraham lived at Beersheba.
I'm going to ignore that you said that. By myself I have sworn, says the Lord. And this always amuses me because a lot of people say, I swear to God. Well, what does God say? God says, I swear to myself. Because there's nothing greater than him. By myself I have sworn. So because of your faith, God says to Abraham, and he restates all the promises. He re-promises all the promises he's given him. He says to Abraham, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to multiply your offspring. You're going to be as numerous as the stars of the heavens. All of these we've seen used before. God has said to Abraham. And then God says, they're going to be numerous as the sand on the seashore, and you shall possess the gate of your enemies. This is new as well. You haven't heard God say this to Abraham.
Nope.
But he finishes it off strong with, and in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. And this was the first promise that God made to Abraham. He says, all the world shall come to me through you and your offspring. So God is bringing it back to where he started from with Abraham. And the good news of this gospel is to know God through Abraham and his children. So in the Old Testament, the only way to get to know God was to go through Abraham and his children. They returned their 3 days home to Beersheba. And what's interesting here that I wanted to sit back and think, if God had led with this test, take Isaac, sacrifice him, and offer him to me as a burnt offering, back when Abraham hadn't gone through all those tests and trials, what would have been the outcome? It wouldn't have gone that well, would it? Abraham wouldn't have listened. But because God had those 25 years to mold Abraham into what he wanted him to be, this test worked. And what that teaches all of us is that, one, God's system of what he thinks is fair, I'm not a big fan of the word fair because God doesn't believe in it. We shouldn't either. That's not fair. It should never be an excuse for something or a reason not to do something or an argument that you make. Fair is not something that God uses. To him, it has nothing to do with fairness. What it tells us is that God will never give us anything that we can't handle. If God is giving you something to do, it's because he thinks you can do it. He's never going to give you any more than you can't handle. So to him, it's not about fairness, it's about what he knows you can do. We're going to finish off with verses 20 through 24.
22.
Oh, yeah, whatever. Verses 20, chapter 22, 20 through 24. Yeah.
Now after these things it was told to Abraham, behold, Milcah also has borne children to your brother Nahor, Uz his firstborn, Buz his brother, Kemuel the father of Aram, Chesed, Hazo, Pildash, Jidlaph, and Bethuel. Bethuel fathered Rebekah. These 8 Milcah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother. Moreover, his concubine, whose name was Rumah, bore Tebah, Gaham, Tahash, and Maacah.
Uh-huh. It doesn't matter.
It's not important.
Yep, it's not important. You don't need to worry about it. So what we have here is that Nahor, who was Abraham's brother, the angel of God says to Abraham, "Now your brother has all these children," and we learn of Uz, Buz, Cuz, Fuz, Muz, and Duz, and all these people. No, I wasn't there. It's not important. Doesn't matter. But what that tells us is that they come from Rebecca is born of this line, of this branch. She's Isaac's future wife. So the reason we had to learn about those people at the end of this chapter is we learn where Rebecca comes from. And Rebecca is Isaac's wife.
Pit trash.
And that is the end. So right there on the table there are some tissues. Give them a hand. Straight ahead.
Daddy, I have some water.
Yep, perfect. Yep, give those a hand.
Daddy, I have water.
Children. Right now. Alright, we're going to finish off with the song Ancient Words.
But see, one thing you can then I put the water onto the camera.
Okay, move back.
Oh,
Alright, Ancient Words. Alright.
Preserve for our walk in this world. They resound with God's own heart. Oh, let the ancient words impart. Words of life, words of hope, give us strength, help us in this world, wherever we roam, ancient words will guide us home. Ancient words ever true, changing me and changing you. We have come with open hearts. Oh, let the ancient words impart. Holy words of our faith, handed down to this day, came to us through sacrifice. Oh, heed the faithful words of life. Holy words of reserve for our good in this world. They resound with God's own heart. Oh, let the ancient words impart. Ancient words ever true, changing me and changing you. We have come with open hearts. Oh, let the ancient words impart. Ancient words ever true, changing me and changing you. We have come with open hearts. Oh, let the ancient words impart. We have come with open hearts. Oh, let the ancient words impart. Oh, let the ancient words impart.
Okay. If for some reason you're unable to listen to the music while we're doing, go through and look those songs up for yourselves. Like I said, that's Ancient Words by Robin Mark, and the other one was Glory to the Lord, and that is clearly based on Psalm 24. As we learned, Isaac was had a lot of similarities to Jesus, and the substitutionary sacrifice of the ram at his moment of need is very similar to Jesus sacrificing himself for us. And what we need to remember is that if we don't have Jesus, we are the ones that deserve to die because of our sins.
Okay, well,
Yes.
I'm never gonna be like that, so I'm good.
All right. So with that, goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.